Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto got the devil's luck. Naruto is a pretty bad ninja, but by God is he lucky. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 1. The young blonde had pranked him before like this, often saying things like, "Oh, you haven't found what I've done yet? Well, good luck." This one was a doozy, leading the Hokage and his guards to search for hours as to what had been misplaced or damaged in the village. The blind chases could last nearly an entire day, before Hiruzen would find the boy lying apathetically in the grass staring at clouds, admitting, "Well, I completely forgot about that. I didn't do anything. Having you run around all day trying to figure out what I did was funny enough." The boy was a clever little devil, he'd give him that, and it shamed him to admit that the god of shinobi had fallen for that particular trick enough times to simply ignore Naruto's antagonizing words until there was physical evidence of some mishaps in the village. So, when the blonde strutted into his office confidently, blatantly stating, "Hey, Gramps, I'm gonna take the scroll of sealing for a bit, is that alright with you?" the Hokage had barely taken his eyes off his paperwork, giving him a grunt of acknowledgement and not wanting to get involved in whatever mind games the boy had most likely planned. It wasn't until hours later that a soldier of his had reported the theft of the artifact at the hands of their own village menace. The old man had felt a fool. But, truthfully, how was he supposed to know that this had been the one time the blonde was telling the truth? When Kakashi announced the start of the bell test, he had expected all three of his potential protégés to immediately duck into the trees, trying to obtain information that could prove useful to defeat him and snatch one of the bells. His expectations had been shot when a third of his new recruits, the blonde idiot wearing bright orange, had not moved a muscle. Instead, he stood there, looking as bored as Kakashi was and eyeing the man. Is he this stupid? Kakashi had thought. Surely the boy had at least some combat instinct to get a more favorable position, or at least the common sense to seem even a bit intimidated at challenging one of the most powerful warriors in the village to open combat. Instead, his teacher's son's face was indifferent, tilted to the side as if pondering something. Kakashi was about to speak when Naruto beat him to it. "I don't suppose you would be willing to just hand over one of the bells now?" The silver-haired man narrowed his brows at the boy. He had heard from the Hokage that Naruto had utilized certain mind games in the past to mentally torture on-duty ninja for his amusement, telling them that he had executed a prank on a massive scale, only for those same ninja to chase a figment of the boy's imagination for the rest of the day. So, it was easy for Kakashi to disregard the comment as the blonde trying to bait him into some sort of slip-up. There was a very slim chance that Naruto had anything truly planned since the beginning of the day. There didn't seem to be any disturbances to the landscape, the boy's weapons pouches had remained untouched during their confrontation, and everything seemed in the man's favor. However, he would be idiotic to discredit how competent the boy could be in the arts of deception and planning when he truly wanted to apply himself. It was how he managed to evade the village Umbu, for the love of God, after painting the monument and his other endeavors. Thus, while there was a minute chance of the boy actually having laid some sort of trap that the man hadn't noticed, the probability wasn't exactly zero, and that was worrying to any trained combatant. He would be wrong to ignore the relaxed demeanor of the boy as well. He looked all too comfortable in his current position, as if he didn't have a care in the world as to how his current altercation went. With any other rookie, he would assume that this was false confidence, but the amount of times the boy had one-upped the Hokage in battles of wit and deceit, in Naruto's terms, tricking Hiruzen and getting away with it, were far beyond what any 12-year-old should have been capable of. No, there was something hidden behind the calm look in those boys' eyes. He looked as though he thought he'd already won, something that Kakashi couldn't stand but couldn't discredit at the current moment. A born prankster was a dangerous person to cross. There could be explosive notes already hidden in the ground beneath him. Getting them there would have been child's play for a boy who had duped the entire military force of a hidden village on multiple occasions. There could be traps hidden all over the training ground, and if Naruto could vandalize the village's greatest monument in the middle of the day without being seen, there was no telling what the boy could have done in the hours that Kakashi had been late to their meeting. It was risky, and the more he thought about the possibilities, the more convinced he was that the boy had something planned to snare him or publicly humiliate him before the day was over. His grades in the academy meant nothing in the face of his accomplishments at shaming the competency of the entire Leaf military 3 times in the last 6 months through some form of pranking. He wouldn't risk it, he concluded. The boy was far too confident and obviously had something prepared that could guarantee him a bell. Either that, or the boy was a master at mental manipulation and this was like a practice round for him. Resolving himself, Kakashi took a bell from his waist, the meaning of the test be damned, and tossed it to Naruto, who caught it easily. "Well played, Naruto. You got me," the Jonin said. Naruto hummed in response casually before pocketing the bell and heading to sit under the shade of the trees. Kakashi would never find out that Naruto had never truly planned anything. There were no devious machinations conjured to torture the Jonin. He didn't move from his spot because he really didn't want to exercise all that much. His face was calm and collected because he was incredibly bored from waiting 3 hours for the silver-haired man to show up. In fact, the blonde had only had a single thought since the rules of the test were explained to him. I bet it couldn't hurt to just ask for a bell. The trip to Wave Country had been arduous, having to smuggle themselves across the large inlet to the shores of Tajuna's home. It was a few hundred yards from the shore that Naruto stopped walking and knelt down to fix the strap of his sandals, which were coming undone. The group stopped with him, eyeing him annoyed as he tugged at the buckle. "Couldn't you have done that later, kid?" Kakashi mentally reprimanded. He would have liked to have gotten to Tajuna's cottage a few hours earlier, but traveling with a civilian was already putting them behind his private schedule. The air was only growing more ominous by the second, and it was as if he could already feel the killing intent coming from an enemy ninja that... "Wait! Get down!" he shouted to his team. Dragging his client to the floor with him, he watched as Sasuke and Sakura hit the deck immediately after his call, leaving only Naruto kneeling and finishing the adjustment to his footwear. The blonde instead stood back up, just as the sight of whirling steel made itself known to Kakashi. He had expected to watch his student cleaved in half by the gargantuan blade, but either incredible luck or some absurd reflexes caused Naruto's head to enter perfectly into a hole near the tip of the blade. The sword's forward momentum stopped as it swung around the boy's neck, losing speed, and slowly coming to an angled halt, the hilt balancing on the ground as Naruto removed his head from the steel's maw. "I see your brat has some good reaction time," came a disembodied voice across the field from them. Kakashi's group looked up at the source, eyeing who the Jonin identified as Zabuza Mamakai, the rightfully feared demon of the mist. As he rose to his feet, calculating how to go about fighting a ninja of a caliber equal to his, the demon across from him was having thoughts of his own. "The kid must have some sharp reflexes to be able to safely catch my sword," he thought. The kid in question, one blonde-haired, blue-eyed eyesore in a hideous jumpsuit, was lifting the blade up to balance it on his shoulder. Once it had fallen firmly onto the boy's body, the blonde began swaying his weight, shifting to what looked to be indiscriminate directions. To anyone else it would look like he wasn't carrying the weight of the sword properly and it was causing him to lose his balance. However, Zabuza saw the movements differently. That pattern of leaning and wobbling looks so familiar. I think it was something that Mangetsu had practiced early in his career, some style of fighting from, oh holy shit, does this brat know the drunken sword style? The drunken sword was a style created in the Land of Iron, gifted to the world by monks who frequently partook in the Devil's Brew. It centered around erratic, swaying movements as if you were inebriated while fighting, causing the enemy to think that you were off balance, when in all reality you had perfect control of where and when you were moving your body. It was a dangerous style to fight against, as there were no clear forms or moves outlined or passed down. It was all encapsulated in being completely unpredictable and unapproachable. If you moved well enough, the enemy would mistake you for being intoxicated and let their guard down even further, giving a clear advantage. The better one flowed in their stagger, the more experienced they were in the style. From Zabuza's standpoint, the brat was moving so convincingly that he could mistake the movements as being truly because the blonde was unbalanced. However, there was no mistaking the similarities it held between when he fought against Mangetsu. It was the one sword style that Zabuza hated fighting against. It was the only one that he wasn't completely sure that he could best. "I need to take the kid out first, then." Without hesitation or waiting for Kakashi to make a move, the mercenary disappeared from his spot and reappeared behind Naruto, knife in hand and ready to strike lethally. His eyes were zoned on where the boy's liver should be, a lethal strike if landed as he intended. In fact, he was so focused on his target that he never noticed the blonde let go of the massive cleaver's handle, letting it fall over his shoulder flat into the head of the demon of the mist, knocking him out cold instantly. His body fell limp onto the grass and was quickly retrieved by a hunter ninja from the mist. The battle had lasted only moments, and Kakashi was struck odd by the swift defeat of a highly capable ninja at the hands of a newly minted genin. With pride, he clapped his blonde student on the back before the group once again began their trek to the village that they were to stay at. Naruto would never get to explain that he hadn't intentionally intercepted Zabuza's sword. He simply zoned out and didn't hear Kakashi's call to hit the floor, standing up from adjusting his shoe in a fashion that just so happened to place the blade around his neck. He'd never tell anyone that he didn't know anything about a drunken sword style. The sword was just really heavy and he couldn't find a way to properly balance himself while it was on his shoulder. And he never meant to knock the demon of the mist out cold. His grip simply faltered and the steel fell into Zabuza's head out of pure luck. It wasn't that he was trying to hide any of this information. It was just that no one ever asked. The battle on the bridge was not going well for Sasuke. His body was riddled with needles and holes, bleeding profusely. He was near exhaustion on the ground, with his blonde teammate standing next to his prone form, unmoving and unwavering in the face of what seemed to be an unconquerable foe. He hadn't even once tried to follow the ice user with his eyes, instead staring straight ahead at one of the mirrors. Is Naruto really not trying to follow where Haku is going? Does he already know? Is he predicting the movements somehow? He wasn't. Truthfully, Haku was traveling really fast, and moving his eyes to match the speed gave Naruto a little headache, so he stopped trying after a few minutes and was trying to make the tingle in his brain go away by not doing anything. Haku saw Naruto's face of indifference as a challenge of sorts, however. Is he mocking my speed? Is he trying to say that I'm not a threat? The insinuation angered Haku. His speed had been the result of training since his early childhood under the tutelage of one of the greatest ninja to ever be produced by the mist. It was indeed something to be feared, especially by a ninja as green as the one he was focused on. I'll show him my speed on his terms then and prove to him that even outside of my mirrors, he's no match for the training of the apprentice of Zabuza Momokai. Haku's form coalesced into a mirror at the bottom of the dome, directly to Naruto's right. He shot out of the ice and sped towards the blonde as fast as he possibly could, clinging to a senbon that would soon find its way into the orange-clad boy's jugular. That had been the plan, had Naruto not bent over at the waist at the last minute, causing Haku's momentum to carry him into the boy's body and vault over his back, sailing through the air and eventually crashing through one of his mirrors and landing painfully on the concrete of the bridge. His right arm had most definitely broken on impact, bending at a grotesque angle at the forearm. His legs felt numb, which may have been a good thing as they looked scraped and mangled from his impact with the ground. His ears rung and a concussion was probably a definite. In pain, Haku could only wonder how the boy had managed to react so fast to his attack. He truly is faster than me, the ice user surmised. Not moments after the defeat of Haku, Gato had shown on the bridge surrounded by hundreds of hired thugs and guards showed on the bridge, breaching his contract with Zabuza and exclaiming his desire to kill all of the ninja on the bridge, specifying the demon's apprentice. Zabuza had rebutted the man with choice words, claiming that Haku had been nothing but a tool for him so that he could make ends meet with more convenience. He was halfway through his tirade when the blonde pest that had knocked him out a week prior made his own opinion known. Wait, I thought you guys were family. The question hit Zabuza harder than he had cared to admit. Not once in the years that he had taken Haku in had he dared to consider the boy family to him. He hadn't wanted it, if for any other reason than not wanting any emotional attachments to tie him down in case they were somehow severed. But was the risk of those ties being severed worth abandoning any chance at having bonds worth sharing? Would he be denying his purpose as a ninja by acknowledging the relationship he'd wished to share with someone he could one day see as a son? Or maybe his purpose as a ninja had completely eaten away at his purpose of being a human. The existentialism of it all crashed into Zabuza quickly. The dilemma he had suddenly underwent weighed heavy on his conscience, and defying his nature both as a ninja, and as a man, he partook in an action he hadn't done since before he had been but a toddler. The man cried. Tears streamed down his face silently at the revelations that he was attempting to make in those split seconds between Naruto's words and the battle with Gato's men that was sure to ensue any moment. With a voice forcing through the shaking of his body, Zabuza answered the blonde boy as best as he could. "You know what, kid? You're right. Haku is my family." And Zabuza tore Gato's army to shreds. In his mission report, Naruto would write that he hadn't meant to body Haku the way that he had. He was simply looking for a weapon to fight back and bent over to pick up a kunai when the ice user had barreled into his side unexpectedly. There was never any deeper meaning to his words to Zabuza, either. He was simply genuinely confused as to the relationship between the missing ninja and his apprentice and had thought that Haku was the demon of the Mist's daughter, not having even figured out that Haku was male. And for the life of the boy he had no idea why the bridge was named after him, but thought it was pretty cool, nonetheless. Hiruzen had laughed after reading the report and stashed it away to secrecy, letting it be a covert source of humor had he ever needed a good smile one day. Chapter 2. Ibiki stared angrily at the blonde boy sitting motionless behind his desk. In the 20 minutes that had passed during the first portion of the exam, the brat had not moved a single inch since his initial cursory glance at the paper in front of him. There were no attempts to cheat, no endeavors to answer any of the questions, and not even a goddamned reach to pick up his pencil. The proctor supposed the boy must have given up after seeing the difficulty of the test. That didn't bother him, truly. He rather enjoyed when the games he played with the greenhorns got to their heads and made them lose all hope. However, that was only fun when their reaction to said loss of hope was visible. The orange monstrosity, on the other hand, hadn't twitched a muscle in what would have been a worrying amount of time had Ibiki given a shit. What many of the examiners did give a shit about, however, was the child's unflinching, piercing gaze. None in the room could attest to whether or not the boy had blinked within the last 20 minutes. His eyes were solely focused on Ibiki, boring holes into the man's skull. The man had to admit, even if the kid had completely lost all hope, his determination and vigor to stand strong in the face of such an intimidating challenge gained him points in the eyes of many in the room. More time passed and the blonde, now named Naruto after the scarred man had checked the seating roster, still hadn't budged. A signal from one of the observing Chunin told him that the boy hadn't written a single answer down nor had his eyes moved from their straight gaze towards Ibiki's own. The first portion of the test was nearing its end and the blonde either had the utmost confidence that he had unfurled the exam's plot or he had completely lost it and was catatonic with shock. Ibiki liked to think it was the latter. Soon the time for the first 9 questions ended and the bandana-clad Takujo wasted no time in explaining the rules for the 10th. Moans and whimpers erupted from the classroom as team after team escorted themselves out. It was the first time that Ibiki saw Naruto move, as the boy blinked slowly, glancing confused at all of the examines exiting the building. Ibiki could have almost smiled at that. Confused why the others are leaving, brat? He thought. You've got guts, I'll give you that. More guts than many of the other genin here. Don't act surprised that others can't stack up to the challenge that you can. You have my respect, but from the look of your teammate it looks like my respect and your guts won't get you very far. The pink-haired girl had her hand nearly completely extended in the air, prepared to submit their team for withdrawal in fear of one of them not being able to answer the final question correctly. Before she could complete the act, Naruto's confused gaze turned to her. Their eyes locked and Sakura's body stiffened, her arm no longer intent on going through with the act. Ibiki could see her confliction, wanting to believe in her team's abilities but at the same time not wanting to damn them for the rest of their futures. Yet, an end to her conflict came abruptly when the blonde spoke a single sentence to her. What are you doing? The girl looked confused before her resolve steeled and she smiled with determination at the boy, lowering her arm and giving him a quick wink of acknowledgement. Ibiki could hear it in the question. Naruto was completely and utterly clueless as to why the girl had raised her hand to withdraw. The sheer confidence rolling off of Naruto was astounding to the older ninja, and Ibiki swore he could almost see the physical manifestation of their village's will rolling from his shoulders. To have the confidence to pass the test was one thing, but having such faith in your team that even the possibility of not continuing was a completely foreign concept was admirable to the highest degree. He asked his teammate that question with utter cluelessness as to why she would even consider backing down. Yes. Ibiki liked this Naruto kid. With a rare smile, The man chuckled to himself before addressing the room full of wayward genin. Congratulations. You all pass. Later on in the night, during a joint drinking session between the T&I department and the academy's educators, Ibiki had told the tale of how Naruto hadn't even touched his exam, instead staring the man down without fear for the entire duration of the test. Many were awed at the boy's tenacity, while Iruka decided that it would be more amusing to not tell Ibiki of Naruto's tendency to fall asleep with his eyes open, a skill that he had learned so that he could sleep in class while not being called out by the instructors. Additionally, Sakura would never find out that Naruto hadn't questioned her intention to quit because he had such confidence in their team. No, he asked her what she was doing because he had just been asleep for the past hour and missed all of Ibiki's speech about the last question. He had absolutely no idea what was happening and wanted to know why she was raising her hand and whether he should be raising his too. But it all worked out in the end. Anko watched with interest as Team 7 trudged through the dense forest. After Ibiki's raving the previous night, she had been absolutely dying to see this Naruto kid in action. After all, anybody who could get a compliment from Ibiki was bound to be special in some way. So far it had been an utter disappointment. The kid seemed absolutely average in every aspect. There had been no fighting, no scouting, no trap setting. Hell, the kids had barely even talked to each other the entire time they'd been together, simply moving further and further into the forest. The only thing she could gauge him on was his chakra use while jumping through the trees, which was, in fact, absolutely abysmal. She finally trailed them to a small alcove hidden within the roots of one of the forest's massive trees. The three members of the team crouched low, scanning their surroundings carefully, and Anko leaned a bit closer to get a listen once the blonde brat had opened his mouth. So, where are we gonna get this earth scroll from? The Uchiha asked. Naruto looked at the boy in confusion. What are you talking about? The pink-haired teammate, apparently named Sakura from the roster she had checked, hissed at him. Idiot! She nearly roared. We're looking for an earth scroll. Didn't you listen to a single thing the proctor said? Anko snickered to herself. This was the boy that Ibiki had promoted? A kid who didn't even know what scroll his own team had? Maybe the guy was losing his touch. Perhaps spending nearly every day of your life torturing or interrogating someone wasn't the best for your mental health. She'd have to put in an anonymous tip to have a psych evaluation done on the man. More bonding time with Inoichi could never hurt. She was brought from musings when she heard his voice again. What? No, we have an earth scroll already. Look. The blonde dug his hand into his pouch and pulled out one of the earth scrolls that they had issued at the beginning of the test. The purple-haired woman was ready to take back what she said about the kid before she noticed the shocked looks on his teammates' faces as the girl shoved her hand into her own pouch and pulled out a heaven scroll to complete the pair. Anko gawked at the scene. Had the kid sent those clones Kakashi was raving about to get a scroll for them? No, that couldn't be. She would have sensed the chakra usage and been able to follow its trail. Was it a fake? Possible, but unlikely. The boy definitely didn't look like a master of forgery and neither did his teammates. Besides, if it was a fake then getting to the center of the forest would be pointless. The necessary triggers in the ceiling array wouldn't activate without its other half and the test wouldn't be able to be completed. So what was it? How in the hell did this kid get an earth scroll right from under her nose? She wasn't one of the best investigative ninja in the village for nothing, damn it, and he had made no moves while in the forest leading her to believe he had acquired one. That could only mean that he had gotten the scroll before the test even began, but all of the teams had their scrolls accounted for before they entered the training grounds. So if he didn't steal it during the test and he didn't steal it from a team before they started, then that means, oh fuck. Anko, making a startling realization at what must have occurred, quickly turned on her heel and raced through the canopy, leaping from the edge of the forest and marching towards the nearly packed tent where the scrolls had been distributed. Before all of the materials could be packed away, Anko snatched the inventory list and scroll designation document from the Chunin leading the scroll distribution team. She perused the papers intently, noting that for each team in the exam, there was a corresponding missing scroll from the inventory list of the designated type, either heaven or earth. These designations weren't counting the teams that they had labeled wild cards, meaning that the team wasn't designated a specific scroll and could get either a heaven or earth scroll simply to spice the exam up and potentially make the search for a certain scroll a bit more challenging. She finally found Team 7 on the scroll designation document and wasn't much surprised to see wild card written directly next to their name. What was surprising was the fact that it was written that they had been assigned a heaven scroll, while there was an extra earth scroll missing from the spare sets in the inventory catalog. Anko surmised that meant either one of two things. 1. The brat had somehow managed to sneak past not only her, but an entire team of Chunin as well to snatch an earth scroll under their noses. She considered it unlikely, as the scrolls were securely guarded and there was no possible way that 5 highly trained ninja of the leaf would miss that shade of orange sticking its grubby little hands into the pile of spare scrolls. That left the woman with option 2. Naruto had somehow either tricked or convinced the distribution team into giving him an earth scroll knowing full well that his team already had a heaven scroll. Anko was nearly astounded. Kakashi and the Hokage had warned the exam's proctors of Naruto's mind games, but they hadn't listened, claiming that a kid of his age wouldn't be able to dupe 2 of the best that the torture and interrogation unit had to offer. They were masters of mental manipulation. How could it be that a kid so green you could still see the grass marks on his ass would be able to get one over on them? They had obviously underestimated him. The shitty brat had actually tricked them into giving him exactly what he needed, and not a single one of them, not even his own team, had been any the wiser. The purple-haired woman laughed in disbelief. "We gotta get this kid into TNI, she thought. If he got something like this over me in a tent full of Chunin, I wanna see what he could do to the prisoners we have there." Yet, if Anko had stayed in the forest to observe Team 7 for just a moment longer, she would have heard the rest of their conversation, a conversation that would have extinguished all of the respect and admiration she was having for the blonde boy. The talk entailed Team 7 discovering that there had been some confusion between them as to who was supposed to procure the scroll for the team. Naruto had thought that he was to get the scroll while Sakura and Sasuke strategized. Sakura and Sasuke, however, specifically remembered the conversation designating Sakura to get the scroll while Naruto waited in place and didn't screw anything up. So, while Sakura had been one of the first at the tent and received a heaven scroll, Naruto was one of the last in line and received an earth scroll. As for how the scroll distribution team hadn't caught this folly and turned Naruto away when he asked for a scroll. Konoha was known throughout the world for their military strength, numerous prodigies, and unparalleled teamwork. Not their ability to keep paperwork. Kakashi had never been one for romance. Maybe it was the tragic loss of the girl who loved him at his own hand. Maybe his mind had been so saturated with erotic literature that his interest in actual women had been snuffed right from under his nose and was replaced with his favorite orange book. Or maybe, just maybe, despite the hundreds of places he'd visited during missions, despite the countless women he'd met or seen throughout the nations, despite the endless opportunities he'd had to find a partner and settle down, he had simply never found a woman amazing enough to catch his eye. He'd never had a love at first sight moment. In fact, Kakashi thought the entire idea was hilariously preposterous. First impressions were important, but far less valuable in the dog days of a relationship from his outsider's experience. The Cyclops wasn't one to respect the superficial looks of women simply for the sake of it. He admired beauty, sure. In fact, the Leaf Village had an astounding amount of dazzling female shinobi, and he couldn't deny stealing glances at them once or twice during training sessions or nights at the bar. He was a man, after all, and there was nothing wrong with appreciating the elegance of the fairer sex in a tame and reserved manner. However, he would never go out of his way to suddenly adopt a chivalrous attitude at the first sight of an exceptionally attractive female. Kakashi had always acted the same with anybody that didn't immediately command respect due to rank. His lackadaisical manner wasn't meant to be purposefully rude. It was just how he conducted himself with everybody. That attitude only changed once the silver-haired man considered you worthy to be held in his highest esteem. Truthfully, Kakashi would admit that there wasn't any one way to go about that trek. Jiraiya had his respect both as an author and a shinobi. The third Hokage earned his respect through his strength and wisdom. Minato held his respect because of his compassion and unshakable morals. Those men were different, and so Kakashi treated them differently. He listened attentively when they spoke. He both lent and accepted advice when necessary. To him, they were not only good shinobi, but good men to boot, something that many considered oxymoronic in a shinobi world. To simply give someone the same amount of personal veneration as those sublime individuals because of charming appearances or societal expectations was horrifically outrageous. Kakashi wouldn't treat you differently if you hadn't earned that right. He wouldn't superficially warp his values for no legitimate reason. Not for a person without his respect. Not for a world that had disrespect him. And certainly not for a beautiful woman. Anyway, that's why he didn't put his porn away while standing next to Kurenai. Apparently Naruto's match against Kiba was about to start and Kurenai had come over to give trash-talking the old college try. She spouted something about dead last and Inyazuka clan heir and your student is about to get thrashed or something of the sort. Honestly, it wasn't until that last remark that Kakashi had taken his full attention from the book. It was her fault for trying to talk to him while the main character was about to have a foursome with the submissive princess, the dominant Amazonian, and the well-endowed geisha who really just kind of watches for most of the scene. Still, she was naked, so it counts. Lugging his eyes from his novel, Kakashi peered over its pages to watch as the two boys readied themselves and the proctor started the match. Kurenai quickly followed Gekko's shout with another incredibly poor taunt. Your student has no chance, Kakashi. If I were you, I'd call the match now. The room watched intently as each fighter prepared for their first move. Kiba entered his taijutsu stance. Akamaru matched his partner's form. Naruto pulled out 3 rations of deer jerky. What the hell? It was Asuma who had spoken up, and the copy ninja snuck a brief look to see the absolute confusion etched in his brows. Glancing around the room, Kakashi saw many similar faces adopted by Genin and Jonin alike on the observation decks. 2 months ago he would have had the same reaction. No doubt they were thinking that Naruto had gone batshit insane, that he was either pulling some prank or that the boy unironically intended to fight his opponent with dried meat and a healthy dose of elbow grease. Kakashi knew his student better than that, though. This was most definitely some sort of trick, either to put Kiba off guard through sheer dumbfoundedness or to set up some elaborate gamble. Perhaps the meat was poisoned? Maybe its scent had some adverse effect on an Inyazuka's sense of smell. Or maybe. The sound of Naruto's voice roused him from his theories. Hey Akamaru, I'll give you some deer jerky if you sit this one out. I've got even more in my rations pouch that you can have once we're done, too. Most of the spectators stilled in shock at the words. They absolutely couldn't believe that Naruto was trying to bribe a dog. A highly trained, military support dog. A dog that legally had a license to kill. A dog that was bred with the sole purpose of standing by its partner's side in both life and death. To anybody who knew even a sliver of information about the Inyazuka clan and their ninkin, the strategy was absolute, unequivocal lunacy. Which drove the audience into even deeper hysterics when Akamaru yipped happily, snagged the jerky, and jumped onto the observation deck and into Hinata's stunned arms, nibbling contently on the meat Naruto had given him. The room was deathly silent, enough so that the dull hum of the lights on the ceiling were audible. Even Kiba had failed to find words at what had just occurred, only donning a look of unmatched awe at what his brother in all but species had just done. The silence was broken with Kakashi, and all eyes turned to him as he did something he hadn't done in a very, very long time. He let out a loud, obnoxious guffaw at what his student had just pulled off, both in disbelief that it had been done and ripe satisfaction that it was a feat only Naruto could have thought of, let alone executed. With his chortle, a few snickers from others near him kicked in, with more being added every moment. Soon, more than half of the spectators in the viewing hall were giggling in some form at the absurdity of what had just transpired. Far behind Kurenai's flabbergasted face, Kakashi even saw the Hokage let out an amused chuckle. A scream of rage tore through the laughter, and all eyes turned back to Kiba as he finally came to terms with the humiliation he was being subjected to. In a fit of frenzy, the brunette boy exploded towards Naruto, throwing any semblance of proper form, obviously intent on devolving the bout into an unhinged brawl. However, 5 things happened when Kiba got within range to try and grapple Naruto to the ground. 1. Kiba breathed in sharply. 2. Kiba gagged and lost his footing. 3. Kiba puked on the floor. 4. Kiba's loose foot slipped in his own vomit. 5. Kiba landed head first on the ground, cracked his skull on the stone tiling, and went unconscious. The spectators once again had no clue what had just happened, and even Kakashi was grasping at straws until he heard a deep sigh of listlessness from his pink-haired student. He tapped her lightly on the shoulder, silently asking for any explanation as to why she was showing no surprise at what the last 3 seconds had deteriorated into. Meeting her sensei's gaze, all the while seeing the obvious eavesdropping of teammates' sensei, Sakura tiredly told what she knew. Naruto hasn't showered since the first day of the exams. He smells absolutely vile and Kiba's extra-sensitive nose just inhaled all of that rancid stench. And with that, Kakashi turned to Kurenai with a deceptively innocent smile. Well, he spouted with great mirth. Not only did the dead last find a way to separate your clan heir from his battle partner to achieve more favorable numbers, but he even had half a mind to consider he might fight an opponent with a heightened sense of smell and capitalized on that by using his body's own natural odors. Now, tell me, Kurenai, has your student been sufficiently thrashed? That night, at Ichiraku Ramen with Iruka and Naruto. That was brilliant, Naruto. It was an unorthodoxly effective example of how to split up opponents in a fight. How did you think of bribing Akamaru out of the fight? Oh, I just really don't like hurting animals. I like Akamaru and didn't wanna have to hit him, so I thought if I gave him some jerky he would leave. Well, I'm still impressed. Especially with your foresight that you might have had to fight Kiba. Not using the showers while at the tower in Training Ground 44 was a great strategy. That place had showers. That's it. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.